What's going on, y'all? Damn, I'm overslept. We gotta do this though. I'm glad this is up. Shit, man, we got something to do. Okay, Metal Gear Solid Delta Series X tech review faster than PS5. Oh boy, do we got some news here. We got a new patch out here, plus patch 1.12 tested. So, according to Digital Foundry, the Metal Gear Solid Delta Series X has an advantage. So let's find out how this is. All right, let's go. Here we go.
With access to the Xbox versions today, it's time to commence part 2 of our Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater coverage. The fact is that Metal Gear Solid Delta's achievements on the visual front impress at least, whether that's on PlayStation 5, PS5 Pro, or even the Xbox Series X release here. The use of Unreal Engine 5's Lumen GI in conjunction with high-resolution materials transforms the jungle setting of the PlayStation 2 original to eye-catching results. But, of course, Delta's frame rate on console hasn't been given quite the same level of care, and we've already seen both base PS5 and PS5 Pro wavering between 40 to 60 FPS in combat scenes especially, with each at times dipping to the 30s. Switching over
Right, and remember the Series X has a better CPU, so it should get more frames.
to the Xbox machines today, then there are two questions left to answer. Firstly, does Series X have a similar issue in holding a stable 60 frames per second? And secondly, what exactly is the state of the game on the 4 teraflop Series S, which only allows for gameplay at 30 FPS with no alternative performance
That's alright,
mode?
that's still good
Let's
though.
find out.
We know how Unreal Engine 5 is, man. I hate that engine, until they make it like Unreal Engine 4, I don't care what anyone says. I'm not a fan. But yeah, this is amazing seeing that the Xbox is faster like it should be because it's a better machine. Like I told somebody, if my machine was 20% faster or 50% faster, my PC, and you had the same, you have another PC that was weaker, and yours is running better than mine, we know it's not the PCs. Game over on that.
Before we kick off, the game has been updated to patch 1.1.2, but I can confirm that this does nothing for performance on console. Judging by the
Damn.
Steam patch notes, Konami's hotfix only addresses a few outstanding bugs and crashes, rather than aiming to rectify frame rate drops. Just to be certain though, I tested this on Xbox Series X against the older patch 1.1.1, and the result is identical while wading through the game's early areas. It's margin of error stuff at best, with a slight 1 FPS variance here and there. The resolution bounds on Series X, which I'll get to in a moment, also stay the same, and drops to the 30 to 40 FPS range are still just as possible as before. In short then, the 1.1.2 update doesn't have a radical impact on the game's optimization on console, and so the wait goes on to see performance improved here. Focusing
Making me
on
wanna
Series
play.
X first, in
I haven't even
terms of
got this yet either.
comparisons, we're broadly looking at a match to
Damn,
base
break,
PS5.
honestly.
As expected, Series X offers two graphics options, a 60 FPS performance mode and a 30 FPS quality mode, and either way, most settings are identical to PS5's equivalent option. Shadow resolution, foliage and object draw, the volumetric cloud quality during Snake's halo jump, and finally, textures for tree bark, character skin, and the mulch underfoot are matched either side. That being said, you'll notice the game's global illumination, the shading under grass in particular, at times differs between the two. Settings appear to change scene by scene, and so in this shot on the quality mode on both sides, the foliage behind Snake features more prominent ambient shading on base PS5. But then, during gameplay later on, with the 60 FPS performance mode selected, it's Series X that shows that thicker shading beneath grass. It's very curious. Meanwhile, other
Yeah, I noticed
areas
that.
are identical in their lighting setup. More often than not, this parity between PS5 and Series X is the norm, but there are anomalies en route through the jungle, differences that at times change the way light and shade impact the scene, and this does seem to have a bearing on performance, as I'll get to.
But it's good though because we realize like they're just doing it based off of the hardware. There's no like, choosing one performance over the other because that console sells more. They just did what they needed to do. And usually when you do see that, you notice that the Series X does have an advantage, as it should, like I said, because mathematically, it just makes sense. Pony, sit down. They don't come in here acting up.
There's one further change on Series X in terms of image quality. Rolling out the res table, the upper bounds of its dynamic resolution in the 60fps performance mode comes in at 1152p on Series X, which is higher than the 1080p peak on base PS5. Interestingly, the
So it has a higher resolution and a higher frame rate. That's what it's supposed to be doing, though. Like, even if it is barely or whatever, it shouldn't be losing to the PS5. Okay.
Slot dual later on puts each machine at a relatively low GPU load, where it maintains 60fps and therefore makes it a great spot to get a best case value. Of course, anytime you see the frame rate going under 60, it means we're bottoming out at that 720p figure on Series X, and much like PS5, that's the full extent of its scalability. Meanwhile, the 30fps quality mode has one change compared to PS5 in that Series X has 1152p set as its lower DRS bounds in this case, which is an increase on PS5's own quality mode lower bound setting of 1080p.
Yeah, so the Xbox version is what you want outside of PC.
The visual setup is straightforward then, but how viable is it in targeting 60fps? The bottom line is that Series X enjoys a performance lead over both PS5 machines across the early swamp area and a later...
Like, I was telling people this, the reason why this happens is because if a game is more CPU demanding, this CPU is better than the PlayStation 5 CPU. That doesn't have a better CPU. So the Series X is going to get better performance, as it should.
Bridge section, each of which run closer to
Only
the 60fps mark. The area-by-area tweaks in ambient shading and GI may well be working to Series X's benefit here, not to mention its 12 teraflop power profile being an existing advantage over base PS5's 10 teraflops. Drops into the full...
I'm glad that he actually mentions that type of stuff. It's like I was saying, this should be happening. It should have been like this at the beginning.
To 50fps range are possible in that opening string of areas, but overall, Series X does ultimately end up giving VRR displays a higher baseline frame rate to work from by a margin of 5 to 6 FPS at times.
And the VRR on the Series X is better.
Plus, combined with the wider 40 to 60 Hz VRR range possible on Xbox systems, it positions Series X as the...
But we see this, right? It's maintaining the 60, it's keeping higher. Even a Pro is dropping down lower than that, though it has different settings, obviously. They're higher, but even then, though, we see a flat line here, and then here we see dips, and then we see way too many here. So there's something to talk about here. We get the idea here. We're going to keep going, though, but this is interesting.
Smoothest way to play on these three consoles. However, there are some exceptions. In one early segment with the hollowed out tree to the left, PS5 enjoys a lead this time, with Series X instead matching the PS5 Pro reading in this case. The second exception is the interior Granini lab area, where PS5 Pro hits the 60fps line most consistently of the three, while base PS5 and Series X fluctuate at the 50 to 60fps range.
It makes sense, but I feel like this should never be that. But like, it should be staying at 60. That should find a way with the way things are, but...
Though Series X is generally on average at the higher value of those two. Series X's relative performance is higher then, but the reality is that it still has issues. It's worth stressing that segments of MGS Delta will flow at 60fps on all three machines with zero issues. The duel with Ocelot flies by at 60fps, and likewise, the cave section right after taking on the Pain boss is mostly a flat 60 on all systems. In my experience, these are exceptions to the rule though, and Series X does sadly have entire areas run shy of the mark. The encounter with Ocelot's guards in Razvet, for example, is broadly a 40 to 60fps affair, especially if you want to go at it Rambo style, as I did with an automatic rifle. Exploding barrels trigger the most sizable drops, queuing Series X to a similar mid-30s lurch as on base PS5 and PS5 Pro. So there's no Xbox advantage at peak GPU stress points in that sense. And once again, any area with water bodies, especially diving beneath the surface, will have the frame rate go from a mid-40s reading to one in the mid-30s. Put bluntly, there's no flawless 60fps on any console, but with a VRR display attached, Series X does stand to smooth out a greater number of drops.
That's funny, they got some of that Bomberman stuff. Man, they Konami haven't made a Bomberman since the last Switch 1 launch. I used to like Bomberman 64 and Bomberman's back in the days, but they just don't do them anymore. Those games were good, by the way. Not the same Konami, though, but it's funny seeing Snake go through the Bomberman aspect.
One final point. I did notice some odd 100 millisecond hitches while moving around large jungle areas on Series X. It's rare, but kicks in at certain points in the map while facing the Fear, for example. For
Okay.
context, I retested this area on base PS5 and found it's also there in the very same spot, though the spikes are less intrusive at 70 milliseconds. Switching over to Series X's quality mode, the game operates much as it does on base PS5. We get 30 frames per second with similar boosts in shadow and object draw as seen on PS5 using this mode. Unfortunately, the uneven frame pacing at 30 also stays on Series X, meaning judder is evident even when we're technically getting a flat 30 FPS line. Added to that, while a majority
Unreal Engine 5 looks like they actually did not too much of a bad job, but once again, Unreal Engine 5 is just, yeah, no thanks.
of play is usually rock solid at 30 on quality mode, there are drops into the 20s on Series X as well. It's all the
Okay.
same culprits as on PS5 really, with explosive barrels and swimming underwater, triggering the more sizable lurchers. Not ideal, but it's not too dissimilar to PS5.
So overall, we get the idea here. The Series X is the version to do. We know the party's going to come in here and defend the Pro, but hey, go ahead. All in all, hopefully you guys are enjoying this game. The new patch is out. Let me know what you guys think about this. I still haven't gotten to get to this. I haven't gotten anything. Lost on the side was disappointing too. I'm glad I waited on that. So, nope, not getting that either. All right, y'all. Peace out. Have a great day. Later.